They said it was progress. They called it rebuilding. But what if it was something else? What if the world you know wasn't the first one built on this land, but the second one? Picture the air after the storm, silent and still. Horses standing where streets used to be, their hooves sinking into a strange new ground. Old doors that were half buried and lamps that hung just above the ground. Somewhere under that mud and trash, whole lives had been locked away. A part of human history that we don't remember is locked up under our feet. This story is told by pictures from the 1800s. St. Petersburg, Moscow, Paris, and San Francisco are all cities that show the same silent puzzle. Half-sunk buildings, doors buried below street level, and windows that don't go anywhere. Engineers say it was construction design, but how could? So many cities on different continents have the same buried pattern without anyone remembering when it happened. The proof is not in books, but in the stones themselves. Look closely at old cathedrals. The first floors are covered in layers of dirt. Look at how symmetrical, precise, and huge their buildings are. Each one looks like the others across oceans. The world we got was not just built. It was found. Like the bones of another civilization had been given new clothes. But there is no history book that tells of a day when the earth rose up and ate cities. There are no letters from survivors, no newspapers or royal orders, just pictures. Quiet and scary. A world that existed before and after the mud. A worldwide silence between those two frames. People say that the winners write history. But what if this time the winners hid the proof? Picture the workers in the 1800s digging through the streets and taking off layers of hard-packed mud. The stories about urban renewal talk about rebuilding, but the pictures show something else: digging. People shoveling, not building foundations, but showing them. Churches coming up from the ground like old tombs that were found by accident. Doorways that go down into the ground instead of into homes. Did a flood happen? Was it a disaster that no one wanted to talk about? Or was it on purpose, like a reset of civilization? Take a look at San Francisco in the 1800s. The Great Fire of 1906 is well known, but the pictures before it show something even stranger: buildings that are already halfway buried in the ground. Streets are bumpy, as if the ground had swallowed the lower floors. And this same pattern, this same hidden beauty, can be found in cities like Moscow, Paris, and Istanbul that are not supposed to be connected. It seems like one event, one disaster affected the whole world and then was forgotten. The Great Mud Flood is what some people call it. The Great Reset for some. No matter what name it has, its silence says the most. How could the most educated people of the 1800s, scientists, architects, and clergy, just forget about such an event? Unless the forgetting was on purpose. It could be that the flood wasn't even water. It could have been something else, like a reset or a veil over an older world. Think about how much power it would take to rewrite instead of just destroy. To put a new story on top of an empire's memory. To forget how those amazing cities were built and replace it with stories about primitive ancestors who couldn't have made such amazing things. But the buildings won't stop talking. It remembers. The domes, spires, and perfect shapes sound like something from before the 1800s. You can feel the strange pull of symmetry and the hum of something old beneath the surface when you stand in front of them. That could be why these buildings were covered, half hidden and half buried. Not to keep them safe, but to hide where they came from. Even the paintings from the old world show something strange: huge skies full of dust and landscapes where buildings look like they just came out of the ground. Painters from that time painted beauty, but their beauty was already broken. They were seeing the remains of something they couldn't put a name to. What kind of empire could make cities like these? Who built domes that channeled energy, towers that lined up with the stars, and streets whose shapes were like sacred harmonics? They named it Tartaria, but that name is no longer on maps. It was said to be a place of great knowledge and beauty, a civilization that lived in harmony with nature. It used to stretch across Eurasia, from Siberia to the edges of Europe. But by the end of the 1800s, it was gone without a trace. Its cities became part of new countries, and its name was taken out of textbooks. How does an empire that big disappear in a single night? Maybe it didn't go away. Maybe it was buried under mud, new governments, and new timelines. Picture yourself in St. Petersburg in the year 1850. The domes are covered in morning mist. Workers dig up the ground to fix up streets that are already very old. Older bricks, arches, and doors appear under their feet, showing that they are from a different time. But no one doubts it. They call it reconstruction, and life goes on. The question of what was rebuilt still hangs in the air. Even after hundreds of years, every hidden arch and buried window is a sign of that world that is no longer there. Some people think the flood was a natural disaster, maybe caused by changes in the earth or by forces from space. Some people think it was planned, an event meant to start over and get rid of an empire that went against the new world order. But if it really was a global reset, who pushed the button? What if the real reason for burying those cities wasn't to destroy them, but to control them? To get rid of the technologies, buildings, and peace that used to define Tartaria. To get rid of all evidence of a civilization that showed that energy, knowledge, and spirituality could coexist without war. So they buried it. Both in the ground and in history. They drew new maps. The empires got new names. The mud became the curtain, and behind it, an older world was shut off. But even worlds that are buried can talk. When we walk through the old parts of cities today and see doors that are half hidden or windows that are underground, something inside us stirs a memory, a déjà vu. Like we've been here before, long before we were born. Maybe that's because we've done it before. Deep down in our memories, the mud may have stopped the stones from making noise, but not the echoes. There is more to history than what we have been told. And when you look closely, when you study the streets and windows that are buried and hidden, you start to feel it, the weight of something old watching from below. Maybe the earth didn't swallow those cities by mistake. Maybe it was keeping them safe from us. Or maybe it was people who buried their own past because they were afraid of what they might remember. No matter where you are watching this from, whether it's night in your city or morning across the ocean, take a moment to stop. Take a look around. There may be more history in the ground than in the books on your shelf. Please let me know in the comments where you are watching this and what time it is right now. I want to know how far these echoes go. In the next video, I'll be giving shoutouts to people who tell me where they live and what time zone they're in. This is because every story should be connected again, just like the cities that used to be. If you feel the weight of this mystery and think the truth goes deeper than what we've been told, make sure to subscribe to Ancient Echoes and send a super thanks to help us on our journey. Every voice and every contribution helps bring to light what was never meant to be forgotten. An empire is still sleeping somewhere beneath the streets we walk on every day. They called it Tartaria, a name that used to cover the maps of the old world. It was huge and bright, stretching from the cold lands of Siberia to the golden edges of Europe. It was an empire so big that mapmakers in the 16th and 17th centuries didn't know where it started or ended. It was just called Great Tartary. That name is no longer found in any official records. It is no longer a part of history. Instead, it is the borders of modern countries and the silence of forgotten memory. But there was a time when Tartaria was a world within a world, an empire of geometry, harmony, and strange power. What happened to it? How can a civilization that was so big just disappear? Its cities were absorbed, its name was erased, and its achievements were buried under hundreds of years of changes. The old maps still have memories. You can find them in libraries, online archives, and collections of old things. Maps from Amsterdam, Paris, and London all show Tartaria proudly written across the middle of Eurasia. Europe was to the west, Persia and India were to the south, and China was to the east. And in between them was a huge area that seemed to belong to everyone and no one at the same time. The mapmakers drew mountains, rivers, and big fortified cities all over it. They called its provinces Independent Tartary, Chinese Tartary, and Muscovite Tartary. But the name started to fade away sometime between the late 1700s and the middle of the 1800s. It was completely gone by the turn of the century. But the buildings are still there, silent witnesses to an empire that is no longer there. If you walk around St. Petersburg, you'll see buildings that look way too grand for when they were built. Domes that hum with perfect shapes and pillars that echo the patterns of sacred harmonics. The same shapes can be seen in Kazan, Moscow, and along the old Russian border. The same style can be seen again in the Ottoman capitals, in Vienna, and even in parts of Asia and North America. Different empires and cultures, but the same architectural style. It seems like the people who built Tartaria left their mark all over the world. And they all followed a design philosophy based on balance and resonance. These artistic choices weren't made at random. The symmetry, the domes, and the star-shaped fortresses all seem to follow a strict mathematical and energetic order. This makes me think that Tartarian architects knew something we have long forgotten: that buildings could live. That buildings could vibrate at the same frequency as the earth. Old blueprints and engravings show cities that look like musical compositions, with streets that form geometric harmonies, towers that line up with celestial points, and domes that are shaped to capture and move energy. This wasn't architecture for decoration. It was architecture that was alive and scientific. The kind of knowledge that could turn cities into tools of the divine, stone into a conductor of energy, and air into a medium of harmony. But how did they do it? Some people think that Tartaria used what modern scientists call free energy. Scientists today often dismiss the idea, but the proof is right in front of them. Take a close look at the spires, the antenna-like finials, and the domes that are covered in conductive metals like copper, gold, and mercury. The windows and facades have very detailed shapes that were made not just to look good, but to sound good as well. These weren't just monuments. They were part of a living grid, a global network where buildings made and shared power that was clean, natural, and never-ending. There are pictures from the 1800s of electric streetlights glowing long before official power grids were thought to be invented. Some travelers wrote about cities where light came from nowhere, music played without musicians, and fountains ran without any visible parts. These could have been additions, or they could have been glimpses of a lost science that used sound and geometry to change reality itself. The more you look into it, the more it seems that Tartaria was more than just an empire. It was an idea, a society based on peace, not control. People there knew how to find a balance between technology and nature, art and energy, and people and the world around them. Maybe that's why it had to be erased. Think of a society where energy was free. Cities healed their people instead of poisoning them. And music and architecture were ways to talk to the universe. What kind of world would that be in the industrial age that came after it, when coal, oil, and making money were the most important things? The story of human progress changed when the industrial powers grew in the 1800s. Anything that didn't fit into that story was quietly taken out. Maps stopped showing Tartaria's name. People gave new meanings to its symbols. They changed the names of its buildings, used them for different things, or tore them down. The rest were said to have been built by European architects, Russian czars, and colonizers who supposedly brought civilization to the wild lands. But maybe it was the other way around. Maybe they got those cities from their parents, just like we got ours. The clues in the old pictures are clear. The streets are full of new settlers posing proudly in front of huge buildings that are way too advanced for their tools and technology. They look more like people who take care of things than people who make things. The buildings that were flooded with mud, the floors that were buried, and the complicated decorations all point to a time before their own. The forgotten chronicles of the East add to the mystery. There are stories in old Mongolian and Siberian legends about a huge empire that was not ruled by kings, but by wise men who kept the earth in balance. They talked about towers that sang to the sky and domes that shone with light that couldn't be seen. The domes, spires, and energy in these stories match the architecture that is still there. Could Tartaria have been a civilization connected by frequency, not by empire, that spanned continents and had a lot of advanced knowledge? Maybe the people there knew something simple but deep, that the universe is music, and that being in harmony with nature gives you power beyond measure. We can also look at the star forts, which are complicated, star-shaped fortifications found all over Europe, Asia, and the Americas. They also don't make sense. Military historians say they were made for defense, but their shape tells a different story. It looks like they were made to channel currents from the earth and sky, because their shapes line up with energetic nodes. They make patterns that are too perfect to be a mistake. It seems like the people who built Tartaria knew about the planet's unseen forces and built their cities to work with them. And when the great mud flood came, whatever it really was, it buried not only cities, but also the memory of this peace. The new powers rose above that silence and built their own world on top of the ruins of one that had learned to live with energy, not against it. We can still hear the echo of those old buildings when we stand near them today. The air sounds different around them. The shapes pull your eyes up, almost as if they are trying to remind you of something your soul used to know. Maybe Tartaria wasn't lost. Maybe it was just hidden. Maybe its spirit still lives on in the way we build things, the way our music sounds, and the old plans for how people used to live together without dividing. They say you can get rid of a name, but not a frequency. And Tartaria's sound still hums under our feet. You can feel it when you walk down old streets, touch the stone of cathedrals that seem too perfect for their time, or stand under a dome and feel the vibration in your chest. That is the whisper of the lost empire, the voice of a world that wouldn't die even when its name was lost. If Tartaria really existed, we should still be able to hear its cities whispering beneath our feet, and they do. The survivors of another age are still standing, towers of stone and symmetry that go against everything we've been told. You will notice something strange if you walk through the center of any old city, like St. Petersburg, Moscow, Paris, Istanbul, or San Francisco. There are windows that look down, doors that open to walls of dirt, and whole levels of buildings that are below the streets. Historians call them basement windows. But what kind of basement has arches, window frames, and fancy stonework that would make a king or queen proud? Something doesn't make sense. These aren't the bases of a building. They're what's left of something that used to be much taller, but has since been lost to time. Think about how precise it would have to be to build such huge buildings in the 1800s, when people used horse-drawn carts, wooden scaffolds, and simple cranes. The buildings in this so-called old world don't look like they were built by people with chisels. They look more like they were built by a civilization that knew a lot about geometry, vibration, and resonance that we can barely understand today. In St. Petersburg, it looks like whole streets are sinking into the ground, and the lower halves of palaces are buried under layers of mud. Some buildings only show the tops of arched windows that used to open up to bright courtyards. Some have doors that are half buried, and their steps go straight into the ground. In some 19th century photos, men in long coats stand proudly in front of these half-sunken facades, as if they don't realize that the world around them doesn't make sense. Why would anyone put windows in the ground? Why would people carve faces, columns, and other decorations into stonework that no one could ever see? Unless, of course, those windows and walls used to be above the ground until something covered them. The same thing happens all over the world. In Moscow, whole blocks look like they're half buried. In early photos of Chicago and San Francisco, you can see the same thing. Big buildings coming out of the mud, with their lower floors hidden from view. Some cities even have stairs that go down to what looks like old buildings below the modern street level. It's like a forgotten layer of civilization that is just below our feet. Historians say these are just basements, but the proof is more visual than theoretical. You can see it for yourself. The fancy window frames, the complicated ironwork, and the symmetry of the design. Basements aren't meant to look good. They aren't made with such care and beauty. They weren't meant to be kept a secret. The domes of the old world cathedrals and government buildings stretch up to the sky with perfect accuracy. Their roofs are curved in perfect geometric ratios. The insides are designed to focus sound and light, like instruments that have been tuned. There are no clear records of when many of these buildings were built. In official records, they just appeared in the 1700s or 1800s, built by unknown architects using unknown methods. But we were taught that the technology needed to cut and lift such huge stone blocks with perfect mathematical symmetry didn't exist. Take a closer look at those rocks. Some weigh several tons and are shaped with machine-like precision. They fit together so tightly that even a blade of grass can't get between them. The same mysterious craftsmanship that can be found in Egypt, Peru, and India can also be found in the middle of Europe and America. How could builders who only used hand tools have made something so perfect? And why do so many of these buildings look the same, whether they're in Russia, Italy, or California? The same patterns, columns, and arches can be found all over the world. Did thousands of architects all over the world just happen to have the same ideas? Or was there a common blueprint, a design language that came from one empire and went to another, but no one knows where it came from? The domes look especially alive, like they were made to breathe energy. Many of them have metal spires or crosses on top that work like antennas. The gold coating wasn't just for looks. It also carried energy. Underneath the domes, in the lower levels of these buildings, patterns start to look like the coils and capacitors found in modern technology. Is it possible that these cathedrals and towers weren't just places to pray, but also energy devices that got their power from the Earth's natural frequencies? If that sounds impossible, think about this. Cities like St. Petersburg and Chicago had pictures of streets lit by lamps long before electrical grids were built. How? Some people say that these early lights were powered by gas, but there isn't much evidence to support that. Some people think that these cities were already wired for something else, a kind of atmospheric electricity that the buildings themselves collected. The theory seems impossible at first, but then you see how each part of these buildings has a purpose. The domes make the sound stronger. The spires work as collectors. The ground floors, which are now buried, might have been the places where the Earth's magnetic field connected. To put it another way, the building was the machine. Then the mud came. There's proof all over the place. You can see men digging streets and shoveling thick layers of dirt away from buildings in photos from the 1800s. There are piles of mud several feet high next to the carriages. It was like the cities were suddenly buried, not slowly worn down by time. After the mud was cleared, the new residents just took over the buildings that were still standing. They built new stories on top of the old ones and called the submerged levels basements. The truth was literally buried. In some cases, the light that comes through the soil still makes these buried windows glow. You can see them in European or American cities today. They are small windows near the sidewalk with dirty glass. There are rooms behind them that used to open up to the world above, but now they are dark. It reminds me of how scary it is that what we think of as the ground floor may not be the original ground at all. Even more interesting are the star forts, which are huge geometric structures that can be found on every continent. They are officially called defensive fortresses, but their symmetry doesn't make sense for simple warfare. Many are half buried, with their fortifications sinking into the ground. Did they also suffer the same fate as the cities that were completely swallowed by a global rise in soil and silt? Pictures from San Francisco after the 1906 earthquake show streets full of mud, buildings half submerged, and workers clearing away debris that looks old even then. In Europe, Asia, and even Australia, you can see scenes like this. The same thing happens on different continents. Could one huge event have caused it, like a mud flood that happened all over the world and changed the shape of the earth, burying an old civilization? Historians don't believe this idea because they say the mud came from floods in the area or bad drainage. But these kinds of explanations don't take into account the global scale. Like the same architecture, the fact that city levels all went under at the same time, and the sudden appearance of new owners in old cities. If these buildings were really made in the 1800s using hand tools and people, we should have a lot of blueprints, records, and construction logs. But there aren't any. There is no sound in the archives. The supposed architects are not in the history books. The dates of construction are often not very clear. It's like these buildings were passed down instead of built. And maybe that's the truth we don't see. We live on top of the ruins of a civilization that was much older and more advanced than we. Think, you can feel something old pulsing beneath the surface when you stand in front of one of these old buildings and run your fingers along the cold stone. A beat, a sound. It feels like the walls remember. These buildings don't feel like old things. They feel like survivors. Maybe the reason they shouldn't exist is that they weren't meant to be found. Maybe what we call old world architecture isn't old enough. Maybe it's a piece of a world that was lost and stayed there until the earth moved to hide it. And if that's true, then the story of our past that we read in school is not only wrong, it is turned upside down. What force made these cities go silent? What if the world we live in now was built on top of another one? What if a civilization was swallowed whole, not by water, but by the earth itself? Imagine this. Cities that used to shine under golden domes, towers that whispered with energy, and streets that were alive with a hum that connected stone, soul, and sky. Now all of that is gone. The Great Mud Flood is not just one thing that happened. It's a pattern that has been carved into the ground of our world. A mystery that goes from Europe to Asia, from America to Australia, suggesting that something huge and strange happened not hundreds of years ago, but just yesterday in the grand clock of history. People who have looked closely know that it wasn't just mud. They call it the Great Mud Flood. It was an erasure. Most people think the idea is impossible the first time they hear it. How could whole cities, big cities with modern buildings and complicated engineering, suddenly be buried halfway in the ground? Why do so many old buildings have doors and windows that go straight into the ground, as if the ground itself rose overnight? These questions are the beginning of one of history's strangest puzzles, a disaster that may have changed the course of history. Let's begin with the pictures, where the evidence won't stay quiet. St. Petersburg, Moscow, Paris, and even Denver or San Francisco all have old buildings that are eerily similar. The streets are lined with beautiful buildings, but half of their lower floors are buried under layers of compacted soil. In a lot of cases, the basements have windows with fancy stone frames and decorative arches, which makes it seem like they weren't built as rooms below ground at all. They used to be entrances at street level, but now they are buried in the ground. The question is how? Historians say that over time, urban growth naturally raised the ground level by adding new layers of construction and debris. But there's a problem: the sameness. The same burial depth and architectural clues can be found on different continents. How can local development explain something that happened almost at the same time from Siberia to Chicago? Unless the cause was not local, but global. The mud flood theory says that a huge amount of liquefied earth, like mud, silt, and debris, suddenly fell over large areas and covered whole cities. What caused it? That's where science and guesswork start to mix with something more. Some scientists say that liquefaction, which happens naturally when there is seismic activity, is the cause. When there is an earthquake, soil that is full of water can lose its strength and become a kind of quicksand that swallows everything that is on top of it. But this still doesn't explain how big and strange the event was. Some people say something even stranger, a planetary discharge, where the Earth itself let out a burst of electromagnetic energy that made the surface unstable. If that sounds too crazy, think about this. We know that lightning can turn sand into glass, and that geomagnetic storms can mess up power grids. What if in the past, a solar event or a change in the planet's magnetic field made the ground itself turn into liquid, pulling down buildings as if gravity had changed for a moment? There is also the scary thought that the event wasn't completely natural. A controlled reset is a planned act of erasure. What better way to hide the signs of an advanced global civilization than to bury it, change the textbooks, and call it progress? Let's take a closer look. There are many photos from the 18th and 19th centuries in St. Petersburg, Russia, that show construction crews digging out what look like the first floors of grand palaces. These floors should have been at street level, according to all architectural logic. Instead, they are buried under tons of dirt, as if the city had sunk into mud. The same is true in Moscow. The same is true in Istanbul. After the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco, digging up the streets revealed buried windows that were too detailed and decorative to be just basements. Colonial-era buildings in Australia and New Zealand have facades that are half buried and look just like those in Europe and Asia. These landslides weren't just random. This was a pattern, a layer of history spread out over the whole Earth like a blanket dot. And then there's the issue of time. When did it take place? Official records show that cities changed slowly over the 18th and 19th centuries. But some photos from the mid-1800s show cities that were already half buried while construction was still going on above them. It seems like people just built new streets and sidewalks on top of the buried world without asking why the ground had risen. Or maybe they were told not to. Some stories say that between 1700 and 1850, there was a disaster so big and disruptive that it made people start over. They say that it's not a coincidence that this time saw sudden efforts to reconstruct the world. The quick growth of railroads and new colonial empires claiming empty land. What if those lands weren't empty, but had just been buried? What if the start of our modern age was on top of the ruins of something much older? Think about the day it happened. The sky got dark, the air felt heavy with static, and the ground started to shake and soften under people's feet. The cities of marble and resonance went quiet. The soil waves covered up grand halls. The mud didn't roar like a flood. It crept, thick and unstoppable, eating the world inch by inch. When it was over, the survivors climbed out of the silence and started to rebuild. Not knowing that they were standing on the ruins of a different time. There are eyewitness accounts, though few and hard to find, that suggest something like this happened. In the 18th century, people in Europe wrote about cities emerging from the mud, strange weather events, and rivers that suddenly changed their beds. Settlers in America even wrote about mud volcanoes and rivers that changed color overnight. It felt like the whole world was moving, like it was being rebalanced or cleaned. The mud flood theory is strange, but it does something amazing. It makes us question everything we know about time. What if the 1800s weren't a time of new ideas, but of rebuilding? What if the steam engines, telegraphs, and grand expositions weren't the start of progress, but the way to save a lost world? Researchers today point to patterns that are too clear to miss. Cities that are said to have grown up on their own have the same architectural features, like domes, spires, and complex symmetry. The same half-buried fronts, The same fancy windows in the basement. It seems like there was once a single architectural language that spoke across continents. A global civilization was erased and then quietly used again by those who came after. But the proof is right in front of you. Every time a street is dug up for construction, the old world comes back to life. Bricks that have been blackened by time, tunnels that go nowhere, and windows that used to let in light now stare into dirt. So, was it on purpose or by accident? It could be both. It could be that nature was the tool and the reset was the goal. People who control the story control the past, and people who control the past control the future. Think about it. Every empire leaves behind ruins. But what if one empire didn't leave any ruins? What if the ruins became the basis for our own cities? What if the windows buried under your feet don't belong to a long-gone century, but to a long-gone world? As you read these words, you might be sitting in a city that still has the buried heartbeat of Tartaria. The ground under your house might have arches, hallways, and sealed rooms that used to let in light. The mud flood might not have killed a civilization. It might have sealed it away until we remember it. After the flood, there was nothing but silence. And in that quiet, someone started to change the story. The flood was just the start though. What came after was much worse. A reset. What if the 1800s weren't the start of the modern world, but the end of one that had been wiped out? Imagine waking up in a city that looks brand new. The buildings are shiny, the streets are paved, and everything is perfectly symmetrical. But you can't hear any construction, see any workers, or see any scaffolding. Imagine a civilization where the clocks were set back, the calendars were rewritten, and people seemed to fill the empty streets like actors stepping into a scene that was already set up for them. Some people call this the Great Reset of the 1800s. It is a quiet, haunting reconstruction of the world after the Great Mud Flood. They say it started after the quiet came. The flood had done its job, burying everything that came before it. A new order rose in its place. Pictures from the middle to late 1800s show cities that are in perfect shape but are strangely empty. There are streets that go on forever and no one is there. There were no workers or citizens in sight in the grand cathedrals and government buildings. These pictures shouldn't be here, but they are. And they all tell the same story. Someone started the world over again. The 19th century was a time of great progress, with industrial revolutions, colonial expansions, and the rise of modern nations. But there is something wrong with that picture. Who made these huge cities? Who carved the huge stones, put together the complicated designs, and built the huge domes and towers that are still standing today? The number of people living there at the time doesn't match the amount of work that went into building that architecture. The technology we were told about back then couldn't explain the accuracy or the size. It's like the world got these cities, not built then and then it was time to start over. A strange thing happened in the 1800s that few people question even today. Millions of orphans suddenly appeared. The orphan train movement moved more than 200,000 children across the continent in the United States alone between the mid-1800s and early 1900s. But this wasn't a small-scale effort to adopt. Trains took thousands of unnamed, undocumented children from city to city and coast to coast. No one knew where they came from or what their stories were. What were these kids? Where did they come from? They were officially orphans because of war, disease, or poverty, which were all caused by too many people living in cities. But if you look more closely, something doesn't seem right. There aren't any records that are always the same about their parents. There are no birth certificates that match. A lot of them were found wandering around cities that had just been rebuilt. Some of them spoke languages that no one could understand. It was like they came out of nowhere, like they were the last people from the old world, the ones who survived the buried civilization. These kids were given new families, homes, and identities. Their names were changed, and their pasts were erased. They became members of the new order. The past was erased, and a clean history was written in its place. It wasn't just in the United States. Similar moves of orphans happened in Europe, Russia, and even Australia. Overnight, institutional orphanages appeared. Census data suddenly showed a lot of foundlings. This happened on every continent in just a few decades, creating a global wave of lost kids. A strange silence also fell over the archives. Manuscripts, city records, genealogies, and other historical documents disappeared or were rewritten. They got new calendars. The way we date things changed. For example, Russia didn't officially switch to the Gregorian calendar until the early 20th century. Before that, there were huge differences between recorded dates and physical evidence. Some people say that the timeline itself was changed so that the missing years were hidden by compressing, rewriting, or expanding the real history of humanity. In the 1800s, something happened that made time itself need to be completely rewritten. Think about the world's fairs, which were big shows that took place in the late 1800s and early 1900s. They were officially built to honor the progress of industry. But many of the fairgrounds had huge palatial buildings, domes, towers, statues, and even whole cityscapes that were supposedly built from scratch in just a few months. These so-called temporary buildings were torn down after the fairs were over. But the pictures show something else. Buildings that looked old, not new. Stonework that is too complicated for plaster or wood. Could these fairs have been staged events to bring back parts of the old world, but with a new name as modern achievements, only to be quietly erased again? Take a look at the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. They called it the White City, and history says it was built in just 2 years. But it looked like Rome had come back to life, with huge domes, Greco-Roman colonnades, and detailed fountains and statues. Why make such great works of art only to tear them down after a year? Unless they weren't new at all, but were left over from a civilization that existed before the reset. The same thing happened in St. Louis, San Francisco, Paris, Buffalo, and Milan. They all had fairs with huge temporary buildings that looked and sounded eerily similar. It was always built too fast and destroyed too soon. It's as if the new world was using pieces of the old world to fill in the holes in its new history. There are also pictures of cities that are empty. There are many pictures from the mid-1800s that show big cities like London, New York, and St. Petersburg with no people in them. There are no horses, carts, or movement. The buildings and streets are spotless. Historians say this is a technical artifact because long exposure times made people who were moving invisible. But that explanation doesn't work when whole blocks and whole skylines stay empty in many pictures. Is it possible that these cities were empty because they had just been reoccupied or were only recently found after the flood? According to the reset theory, a powerful force, maybe a secret global government, decided to repopulate the world after the mud flood with new management. They gathered survivors and orphans, moved them, and gave them new names. The old institutions were destroyed, and new governments sprang up overnight. Monarchies fell and republics rose, but maybe the people behind the scenes stayed the same. People often think of the Industrial Revolution as a time when human creativity won out, but it could have been when old world technologies were put to new uses. Think about it. There was no clear inventor for steam power, electricity, or telegraphy. They all came out at about the same time. Yes, patents were filed, but they were always on the edge of something that was already known. Like the knowledge was found again, not made up. And the people who found it again became the new founders of civilization. The more you look into the 1800s, the more it feels like a script, a carefully written story about how people progressed, hiding the ruins underneath. Wars like the Napoleonic Wars, the American Civil War, and the revolutions in Europe could have been planned chaos. They could have been used to get rid of the last remnants of the old world and bring in the new systems of power. and the people orphans. Settlers and workers were the ones who did the rewriting. They built their lives on top of buried cities, never asking who put the first stones there. They were told that the world was old and that everything that had happened before them had already been known, found and conquered. And they believed it because they didn't have any memories of the past. It's easy to control a world that forgets its past. At the end of the 19th century, people fully entered the new timeline. The maps of the world changed. Atlases no longer had Tartaria. Myth was used to describe ancient knowledge. There were smokestacks and wires instead of resonance and free energy architecture. The sky that used to hum with harmony was now full of the sounds of industry. It was the perfect cover. A new civilization growing on top of the old ones, but there are still signs. In the windows that were only half buried, the tunnels that were left empty, the archives that were missing, and the millions of kids who came out of nowhere. These things didn't just happen by chance. They were signs that something had been reset, and as the dust of the 1800s settled, a chilling realization emerged. The world we know today might not have started with progress, but with amnesia. The last step in the reset was to erase the memory of the old world. What if you woke up one day and the history of your people, including your ancestors and your whole civilization, was gone? Not burned to the ground or buried in the ground, but carefully rewritten, word, until even memory followed a new script. That was the reset's real genius. The Great Mud Flood may have buried cities, but the real burial happened later, in schools, libraries, and encyclopedias. It wasn't shovels that started the erasure of memory. It was pens. In ink, the history of the world was rewritten. From 1850 to 1900, it was a quiet operation that had a big effect on everyone, even though they couldn't see it. Books that used to talk about Tartaria, a huge empire that stretched across Eurasia, are no longer available. They redrew old maps. Encyclopedias that used to call areas Great Tartary now call them Siberia, Central Asia, or just unknown territories. It was as if a civilization that had once changed continents had never existed. Schools started teaching shorter, simpler, and cleaner versions of the past. In this new version of history, people made steady, logical progress. There was no room for secrets, lost empires, or technologies that had disappeared. The new books told stories about brave explorers, noble kings, and scientific revolutions. But they didn't say anything about the quiet world that came before. People could point to maps that showed how far Tartaria reached 100 years ago. By 1900, even academics said it never happened. This wasn't a mistake. Education became the new way to control people. Kids learned about dates, kings, and wars, but they didn't know that these were just parts of a much bigger picture. The idea of a forgotten world, a global network of cities that once used natural energy and resonant design, was so completely erased that by the early 20th century, even the name Tartaria sounded crazy. It wasn't just that old books disappeared. They were replaced on purpose. Libraries burned, officially by accident. Collections were lost in wars and renovations. Huge archives disappeared during transitions of government. A strange pattern emerged everywhere. The 1800s became the beginning of recorded history. Everything that came before that became unclear, mythical, and murky. No one noticed that humanity had been given a new timeline, but the silence that came after was the most haunting part. People started to live without remembering things. They made new lives and new countries based on stories that were made for them. The story of how people have progressed was turned into a ladder, with each step carefully placed to lead away from the truth. People were told that the world was changing, getting better, and moving from darkness to light. But what if it was the other way around? What if progress was really a fall into forgetfulness? Museums had a lot of ancient artifacts, But no one asked why the craftsmanship of old stonework was better than that of modern buildings. Why is it still impossible to copy cathedrals, palaces, and towers that were supposedly built with simple tools? The story was changed to make the impossible seem possible, to make the old seem simple and the new seem great. The language changed too. Words that used to mean a lot were changed or erased. The word Tartaria itself became a bad word, something not to be taken seriously, a myth for people who believe in conspiracy theories. But the old dictionaries say something else. Older versions of the Encyclopedia Britannica said that Tartary was the biggest empire in the world. The same encyclopedia acted like it never existed a few decades later. One simple editorial choice erased an empire from history. Philosophers say that death is not the end of life. Forgetting is. A civilization really dies when it forgets its own story. People in the 1800s may have lived through the mud, but they didn't live through the rewriting. They woke up to a world that had forgotten about them. Their cities were filled again, their histories were changed, and their inventions were given new names. Those who remembered were called crazy or told to be quiet by new science. The new places that opened up, like museums, universities, and geological societies, helped shape the story. They gave people a new way to think about things. Evolution, the Industrial Revolution, and the Age of Reason. These became the holy pillars of the New Age, and anyone who questioned them was called a dreamer. The rewritten world was complete and made sense because all of the contradictions had been removed. But there are signs, even if they are weak and hard to see. An old atlas that was mislabeled by accident. A book in the basement of a library that no one goes to anymore. A picture of a city that looks much older than it really is. These pieces made it through the purge, and together they tell a quiet truth. Memory can't be completely erased. It stays there, even when it's buried. This erasure has a lot of emotional weight. Think about how many generations have lived without roots, thinking that their whole civilization started only a few hundred years ago. Think about how you might never know that your great-grandparents may have walked on streets built by a world that was much more advanced than ours. Humanity became an orphan on purpose, not by accident. It wasn't just a physical reset. It was also a mental one. The people who control history didn't have to get rid of every trace of Tartaria. They just had to get people to stop asking questions. They made people feel safe by being sure. They took away wonder and replaced it with textbooks and mystery with measurement. The past was a closed book, and the future was a straight line. But deep down, something in the human spirit remembers. We feel it when we stand in front of old buildings and know that they weren't built for the people of that time. They were passed down. When we look at old pictures of quiet cities, we can feel it because they don't fit the story we were told. We feel it when a strange sense of nostalgia stirs up. It's not for our childhood, but for a time we never lived but somehow remember. That is the buried memory, the heartbeat of Tartaria, still beating under layers of rewritten history. And as more people start to ask questions, look into things, and compare old maps and missing years, that heartbeat gets louder. People may have lost their story, but stories always seem to come back. Civilizations don't die when their buildings fall down or their empires fall apart. When people stop telling their stories, they die. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to tell this story again. But some pieces survived. Hidden as a celebration. What if the biggest parties of our time were at the start of something new, but the end of something? What if the beautiful world fairs of the 19th century, which showed off human progress, weren't built to show off a new world, but to hide the remains of an old one? Picture walking into the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, where you would see huge white buildings, domes that sparkled, long colonnades, and electric lights that turned night into day. There's a lot of awe and triumph in the air. You hear that this was all built in 2 years. But when you look more closely at the stone, The scale, and the impossible perfection. Something doesn't seem right. People said that the World Fairs were the best thing that humans had ever done. The best thing about industrial civilization. But when you look at them from a different angle, they look like something else entirely. A ritual of rebirth or an architectural masquerade. Cities that seemed to come out of nowhere, with buildings that looked like the palaces of Rome, the temples of Greece, and the cathedrals of the old world. And then, just as mysteriously, they disappeared, destroyed, burned, or taken apart as if their only purpose was to be remembered as myth. Think about how big these things are. The Chicago World's Fair was built from scratch in just 2 years and covered more than 690 acres, which is almost the size of a whole city. There were more than 200 huge buildings, including domes the size of planets, marble halls, fountains, towers, bridges, and statues. It was a dream world of perfect shapes and divine symmetry. The world was amazed by the new electric lights that made it glow. They called it the White City. But how could a group of people from the 1800s build a whole city in such a short amount of time using only horses and hand tools? The official story is that most of the buildings were temporary, made of plaster and wood, with fancy facades that were only meant to impress, not last. But pictures tell a different story. It looks like stone because of the carvings, the big columns, and the surfaces. The work looks old, polished, and much better than what cheap plaster could make. And even if they were only for a short time, why get rid of them? Why destroy such perfect beauty that it still haunts us more than 100 years later? Maybe it's because these weren't new things. Maybe they were leftovers. The same thing happens on every continent. The Paris Exposition of 1889 had tall domes and the newly built Eiffel Tower, which was a strange mix of old-world design and modern meaning. The St. Louis World's Fair of 1904 covered hundreds of acres and had neoclassical buildings that looked like the temporary cities in Chicago and San Francisco. The Buffalo Pan American Exposition, the San Francisco Exposition, and the Milan World's Fair all had the same problems. They were built too quickly and then destroyed right away. It seems like the same ghostly city was rebuilt over and over again, each time with a different name, to remind people of something beautiful, old, and divine, and then to erase it all over again. Historians say that the fairs showed how smart people are. They showed how far we've come, how powerful science is, and how modern life is just beginning. But what if they were something deeper? Something more symbolic, a way to bring pieces of the old world back into the new story. The people who went to these expositions were the first generations after the reset. They were men and women who were born into a world that had already forgotten where it came from. These fairs may have been made to change how they thought about things. They may have been meant to show them what civilization looked like and convince them that their own kind could achieve such beauty and order. But these cities had a creepy quality to them that went beyond the music and fireworks. The buildings looked old, not new. Not factories, smokestacks, or machines, but domes, arches, spires, and statues of gods and angels. The designs were similar to Tartarian geometry, which is known for its perfect balance, resonance, and symmetry. People who lived in an industrial society didn't make these things. They were the language of a civilization that knew how to balance matter and energy, form and frequency. It was as if the earth itself had whispered the old designs back into people's hands, and the fairs looked like memories come to life. And then, just like that, they were gone. People tore down or set fire to the temporary cities. It was only a year after the fair that the Chicago White City burned down. The same thing happened to the San Francisco Exposition. Many of the fairgrounds in Europe were mysteriously destroyed and replaced with modern concrete. It was as if someone wanted to make sure that these echoes of the past wouldn't last long enough to be questioned. Why put in the work to make something so beautiful only to tear it down? Unless the goal was to perform instead of preserve, that it seems like a ritual, doesn't it? Make a picture of paradise, let people be amazed, and then burn it down as a way to cleanse. A story told over and over, from ashes to glory, from darkness to light, from flood to new life. Each fair was like a staged resurrection, a way to make people think that modern civilization had risen from chaos. Not memory. There were also strange technologies at the fairgrounds, like electric lights that worked before the grid was built, moving walkways, huge dynamos, and strange towers that looked like they were sending energy. Some people said that the cities seemed to hum, as if energy were moving through the air without being seen. These weren't just displays. They were demonstrations of something older. Maybe pieces of free energy systems that the Tartarian world once knew how to use. Tesla's experiments with wireless energy started just a few years after the Chicago Fair. Is it a coincidence? Or is it continuity? The fair's main attraction, the electric tower, had glowing orbs and a design that radiated energy. It looked a lot like Tesla's later Wardenclyffe Tower, which also worked on the same principle of atmospheric energy. It's like someone already knew or remembered how to use the natural power that the old civilization used. The fairs also had another purpose, to train people's minds. People in the 19th century were getting over a global disaster, famine, war, and the flood's aftermath. They got cities that were empty and technologies that they didn't fully understand. The fairs brought back the story of progress, replacing the truth of inheritance with the illusion of invention. They were told, "Look at what we can make," when in fact they were standing in the ruins of something that had been built long ago. It was history rewritten through show. When you think of the world fairs as restorations instead of creations, their strange perfection makes more sense. The architects didn't make new worlds. They just painted over old ones. The same foundations that survived the flood may have been under the plaster and paint. The fairs were the last show before the real destruction started. The planned destruction of all the old Tartarian buildings in every major city on Earth. The name World's Fair even seems symbolic, as if the whole world was being shown to itself again under new management. The leaders of the New Age stood in front of the people and said, "This is civilization. You are this now." And people believed it. They clapped for the illusion, not knowing that they were at the funeral of a world that was much older than they could have imagined. Today, all that is left are the photos, grainy, ghostly pictures that are too beautiful to be true. The streets are faintly lit, and the domes look like they are still alive. These pictures give me the creeps, like dreams that won't go away. You can almost hear the echoes of footsteps that don't belong to this century. And when you look at those old pictures of the grand arches, the shining towers, and the perfect balance of stone and sky, you can't help but wonder, how could something so beautiful be called temporary? Who says that perfection should only last a year? Maybe those choices were made a long time ago. The world fairs weren't just parties. They were a goodbye, a controlled way to remember the old world while pretending to be the start of a new one. They let people see the pieces one last time before burying them under the illusion of modernity. The flood covered the cities in mud. They were buried in silence after the reset. But the world fairs were full of show and excitement. And there was something more behind every dome and spire, an energy that used to connect heaven and earth. People say the old world was quiet, with stone, marble, and simple tools. But what if it wasn't quiet at all? What if the cities of the past hummed softly, full of invisible energy that flowed through the air? This energy wasn't made, it was collected. When we look at the remains of what is called Tartarian architecture, with its domes, spires, towers, and geometric symmetry, we might not be looking at decoration. We might be looking at a design, which is the plan for an energy system that no one ever told us about. Think of a society that didn't need wires, coal, or fire. A world that got its energy from the air around it, not by force, but by resonance. The building itself worked like a living circuit. A cathedral or palace's dome, spire, or metal ornament was a conductor. These weren't just artistic touches. They were antennas that were perfectly tuned to pick up the etheric currents that filled the air. Tesla later called this invisible ocean of energy the electric ether. Tesla once said, "To understand the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration." Those words could have come from the people who built the old world. They knew something we've long since forgotten, that form and frequency are the same thing. Not only does architecture that follows the rules of geometry look good, it also fits in with nature. Look closely at the big cathedrals, the huge government buildings, and the star-shaped forts that make up Tartarian architecture. Their symmetry is not just for looks. It's also mathematically accurate. A lot of the time, the domes sit on round bases, which makes a resonant chamber below. The insides are lined with conductive materials like metals, crystals, and even gilded decorations that would make vibrations stronger. The spires, which are topped with metals like gold or copper, point up like lightning rods and direct the charge in the air. There are networks of tunnels or chambers under many of these buildings. These may have been used to soar or ground this natural energy. It was like the whole city was one big resonant machine that breathed with the beat of the earth. Our ancestors may have known how to line up buildings with telluric currents, which are natural electrical flows that run under the surface of the earth. The old builders didn't just put their cities anywhere. They put them exactly along ley lines, which are invisible rivers of magnetic force that connect sacred sites on different continents. The shapes are the same all over the world, from the pyramids of Giza to the domes of St. Petersburg, from Angkor Wat to the cathedrals of Europe. They all seem to have been built to the same harmonic code, which was a global grid of energy that once powered both matter and spirit. Tesla rediscovered this principle when he did his experiments in Colorado Springs in the late 1800s. He built a tower with a copper dome on top that was meant to resonate with the Schumann frequency of the Earth, which is about 7.83 Hertz, or the planet's natural heartbeat. His tower didn't make electricity. It got it, boosted it, and sent it wirelessly. Does this sound familiar? The design was very similar to the old domes and towers that can still be seen in many places around the world. The difference was that Tesla was trying to fix what had already been broken. The Wardenclyffe Tower, Tesla's most ambitious project, was a symbol of this science that is no longer known. It was supposed to get its power directly from the air, giving everyone free energy. But the project was suddenly stopped, and the tower was torn down. Officially, it's because of money, unofficially ... Because free energy doesn't fit in a world where people are in charge. The more you learn about Tartarian architecture, the more it looks like the systems Tesla talked about, drawing energy from the air, sending it through resonance, and balancing it with geometry. The old cities were more than just pretty. They were living networks of energy. The buildings stored it, the towers directed it, and the domes collected it. The people lived in the current, which was full of subtle vibrations, natural frequencies, and radiant light. There are stories of cathedrals where candles weren't needed, because the walls glowed faintly at night. There are pictures from the 1800s that show streetlights before electricity became common. How did they get their power? Could the air, which was full of etheric charge, have given us what we now call free energy? Many of these buildings had golden spheres on top of their towers, domes, and spires. Historians say they are just decorative finials, but what if they were more? The sphere is the best shape for holding electrical charge. They might have had metals, mercury, or crystal resonators inside, which are parts that can make vibrations stronger. Each building became both a receiver and a transmitter, linking the earth below and the sky above to form a bridge between worlds. And geometry was the most important thing. The builders of the old world were experts in sacred geometry, which is the math of creation. The ratio of the golden mean, the angles of the hexagon, the spiral of the Fibonacci sequence, these weren't symbols. They were equations of energy. By shaping matter according to divine proportion, they created resonance between the structure and the cosmos. The building became alive, humming in harmony with the frequency of existence itself. It's possible that the term architecture once meant something more literal. The art of channeling the arch, the primal energy of the universe. Every arch, column, and curve was part of a greater system of flow. When a bell rang in a cathedral, it wasn't just a sound. It was a frequency activating the structure itself, sending ripples through the ether. The sound, the geometry, the materials, all synchronized into a living technology. Even music and ceremony played a part. The deep, resonant tones of cathedral organs may have done more than just play music during worship. They may have also helped tune the building. The vibrations could make the air, the walls, and even the people inside all have the same frequency. Worship wasn't just a sign. It was full of energy. People became the same divine current that powered their cities. Then, all of a sudden, it was over. The mud floods, fires, and resets that destroyed the old world didn't just wipe out cities. They also cut off people's access to this way of thinking about energy. The new world changed domes into chimneys, spires into smokestacks, and resonance into combustion. The sacred science became superstition, the ether became myth, and the living earth became just a rock in space. But the memory still stirs deep down. When we stand under a cathedral dome or hear a choir echo through stone, we can feel it. We feel it in places where silence and geometry meet, where the air seems to be full of energy. Something old hums under our cities and even under our skin. Maybe this energy was never meant to be controlled, but only balanced. The builders of the past didn't take advantage of nature. They danced with it. Their power came from being on the same page, not from being in charge. They knew that everything, from the wind in the sky to the heartbeat of the earth, is part of one big cosmic symphony. And maybe they learned to live in the music back then, when no one else did. Maybe this energy wasn't just power. Maybe it was consciousness itself. They say stones don't talk, but the walls of the old world do in a language older than words. Every line, arch, and dome carved into marble was more than just a show of skill. It was a prayer written in shapes. The people who built Tartaria didn't see science and spirit as separate things. They thought they were both ways of seeing the same truth. They thought that the divine wasn't hidden in temples, but could be seen in proportion, resonance, and form. Their cities were like living mandalas, which are physical copies of the heavens that were built on earth. Something about you changes when you stand under a huge Tartarian dome. The air seems to hum, the light bends in a different way, and the silence feels alive. This isn't a fantasy. It's the experience of geometry talking to the human spirit directly. People in the past knew that shape affects feelings. Circles stand for unity, squares for stability, and triangles for divine ascent. So they built with a plan. The dome stood for the vault of heaven, which made the infinite visible. The spire pointed to the divine axis, which is a bridge between the sky and the earth. Every detail had a purpose, and every proportion worked together to make music. The cross, which can be seen in both Christian architecture and ancient Tartarian symbols, was never just a religious symbol. It was the place where two worlds met, the horizontal line of the material world and the vertical line of the divine. They met in the middle of everything, which is where balance is. The same shapes keep showing up on old maps of Tartaria. Circles inside crosses and stars inside domes. These weren't just random events. They were echoes of an old belief that everything, from galaxies to atoms, follows one holy code. That code is geometry itself. The builders used the same ratios that can be seen in the movement of planets, the petals of flowers, and the spiral of a seashell. Their buildings used the golden ratio phi, which is 1.618, over and over again. Not by chance, but by choice. They thought that when matter looks like heaven, it opens a door to the divine. The building doesn't just protect the body. It also wakes up the soul. Their stars and decorations even told stories. The 8-pointed star, which was carved above doors and etched into tiles, stood for the balance of the 4 elements and the harmony of the directions. The 6-pointed star, which is made up of triangles that fit together, stood for the union of heaven and earth, spirit and matter. The domes were painted with heavenly patterns like suns, moons, and constellations. This reminded everyone who passed by that our true home is not on earth, but in the cosmos. The Tartarians thought that architecture was a way to make prayer last forever. Their cities were places of vibration that were meant to align human consciousness with divine order. The purpose of walking through them was to change you, to calm your breath, center your spirit, and lift your mind above the noise of the world. That's why even the ruins of these places still feel strange and peaceful. The geometry keeps vibrating, even after the builders have left. But there is a deeper code hidden in this harmony that modern science is just starting to see. Geometry has an effect on frequency, and frequency has an effect on consciousness. The sacred shapes of the past may have been tools for waking people up, like fine instruments that tuned the human body to the sound of creation. Imagine being inside a dome that makes sound and light louder at certain times, and your heartbeat matches the building's rhythm. You are no longer separate from the structure at that point. You become part of the vibration. This may have been the secret purpose behind their design, not only to hold bodies, but also to lift souls. The building wasn't just there. It was alive. Every temple, cathedral, and palace served as both instrument and educator, imparting lessons in proportion and silence. To be inside was to remember that you were made from the same pattern and divine geometry as everyone else, but the code was lost when that world was buried. People kept the stones, but they forgot what they meant. The domes became decorative, the stars ornamental, and the proportions coincidental. The deeper language that used to connect. Cities with constellations and cathedrals with planetary harmonics is now gone from our memories. Yet, even now, when we see those old towers or walk through the echo of a ruined hall, something stirs inside us, a faint recognition, like a song we once knew. The geometry is talking to us again, telling us to remember that balance was never a concept. It was a way of life. The builders didn't just worship the divine from a distance. They built it, lived in it, and became it. Perhaps that's the real secret hidden under the stones. That the world used to be a temple, and we've just forgotten how to listen to it. But as people entered what they called the Age of Progress, they moved further away from that harmony. Transition. But maybe not everyone forgot. Write at least 700 words in English and in paragraph form. ChatGPT said. They called it progress. Iron rails cutting across continents, smoke rising like banners of triumph, cities glowing with electric light. People around the world celebrated as if they had won over darkness. But something old and human was dying under that bright new sky. The industrial age promised salvation through machinery, but what it delivered was a quieter kind of fall, a separation between man and the world that had once breathed with him. People built in harmony with the land before what is now called progress. Before planting, they listened to the sky, and when they built their cities, they respected the shape of the earth. The people who built Tartaria thought that the world was holy. They thought that every river was a pulse, every mountain was a spine, and every dome was a reflection of the heavens. They were shaping spirit when they worked with stone. But the new world didn't build to honor. It built to rule. Cathedrals were replaced by factories. The grinding of gears drowned out the sound of resonance. The light that used to come through stained glass was replaced by the cold glare of gas lamps and later, electricity. These artificial suns lit up the night, but made something inside the soul dim. They said that people had made progress, but it wasn't clear what that meant. We learned how to measure progress in tons of steel and power in horsepower. But we forgot how to measure peace, awe, or silence. They said machines would set us free from hard work. But they made us do the same thing over and over again. They said that education would wake us up, but they changed the past to fit the story of progress. They said we had won over nature as if we were ever supposed to. But in doing so, we became strangers in our own creation, living in amnesia even though we were surrounded by light. The big lie about progress was that we thought we had left nothing behind when we moved forward. The story of humanity was changed, edited, and sold as evolution, but it might have been a step back that was hidden behind silver and steam. We started to worship machines, think that complicated things were smart, and think that fast things were successful. But the builders of the old world knew something deeper, that real progress is not about how quickly things happen, but how well they work together. You can see the difference in the quiet corners of old buildings that have been forgotten. The old domes breathe with purpose. Their curves are meant to catch sound, light, and spirit. Modern buildings, on the other hand, are just boxes that are useful, efficient, and lifeless. They don't lift the heart or sing to the sky. They just stand there. The soul of architecture was traded for utility, and in that trade, something of us was lost too. We were told that progress meant abandoning myth, faith, and mystery. That the world was a machine to be understood, not a being to be known. But what if progress was never about understanding? What if it was about remembering? What if our ancestors were not primitive dreamers, but guardians of a wisdom we can no longer hear? Life's rhythm changed. The seasons didn't matter anymore. The clocks did. Time itself was used as money. And with each new factory and each new law of efficiency, we moved further away from the music that used to guide us. The earth became a resource, the sky a place to conquer, and people, who used to be the link between worlds, became consumers of their own reflection. But the silence is still there, waiting. The geometry still makes noise under our feet. The same energy that once lit the domes of Tartaria is still moving through the air, but no one can see it or feel it. Progress tried to bury it, but it couldn't kill it. Maybe the real tragedy is that we stopped believing that such harmony was possible, not that the old world was erased. The lie of progress wasn't in the machines themselves. It was in the story that went with them, that they were our fate and what made us human. But what people built was never meant to define them. Only what they remembered did that, and as the world moved on, building glass and steel towers to replace the marble of the past, it forgot what those old stones used to say, that the highest knowledge is not conquest, but connection. But maybe not everyone did forget. There are always people who live through destruction. Not always of flesh and blood. Sometimes of knowledge. Not everything went away when the old world was buried and given a new name. Pieces remained, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to notice them. There may not be any records of the Tartarian Empire in history, but the buildings we still walk under still hold some of its wisdom. The past starts to whisper if you look closely. A strange thing about many of the world's oldest cathedrals and government buildings is that they all have impossible precision, perfect acoustics, and geometry that seems to vibrate with purpose. These weren't just random events or the quirks of architects. They were plans passed down from a long-lost science. There is something older than the fancy carvings and Gothic arches, a silent code of energy, proportion, and power. You can feel it in the way sound travels under a vaulted ceiling, or how some domes vibrate when thunder hits them. These aren't just buildings. They are still alive. Some people think that the people who survived Tartaria's knowledge went underground. both literally and symbolically. There are maze-like tunnels under old cities all over Europe, Asia, and even North America. Official history calls them catacombs, mining passages, or sewage systems. But the way they are built, their size, and how they are lined up suggest that they are something else. Places to get energy, talk to people, or hide. A lot of these tunnels lead to old cathedrals or civic centers, which are the same places where Tartarian architecture used to be very popular. It seems like the new world was built right on top of the old one, hiding it on purpose but still drawing power from its hidden veins. There are also secret groups like the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, and the Builders' Guilds that came about around the same time that Tartaria's name started to fade from maps. Their ceremonies are based on geometry, light, sound, and symbols. Their emblems have domes, compasses, and pillars that are similar to the holy buildings in Tartaria. Did these groups come from the ashes of the old world? Or were they its quiet guardians, responsible for keeping pieces of the old science safe until people were ready to remember? There are always people who remember too much when things start over. Maybe that's why these groups kept their secrets, not to control, but to stay alive. They didn't want to share their knowledge with people who weren't ready. It was dangerous and powerful knowledge that could make a world better or worse. It seems like even art has bits of it left over. Look at paintings from the 17th to 19th centuries. They show huge cities glowing under strange skies, towers with domes that don't make sense.
All right, yeah, I added myself on purpose. Come on, y'all, get along in the chat, please. I'm going to stop it there and show it the rest of it another day. And I do have another little video on this subject. So, yeah, that first video would go on an hour and a half. Yeah, that's right. An hour.
Did you know that an entire empire has been erased from history? Once upon a time, you could open any map from the 1500s
This one is just 20 minutes long.
Through to the 1800s and find a massive territory labeled Tartaria, or Grand Tartary. This was no little kingdom. We're talking about an empire that stretched from Eastern Europe across Asia. But suddenly Grand Tartary disappeared without a trace. What happened to the once magnificent civilization? Did they disappear naturally, or is there more to the sudden vanishing? We will find out together in this new episode of Secret Origins. Welcome. Before we dive into the conspiracy, let's start with the most undeniable evidence of all, the maps. Take a look at maps from the 1500s to 1800s. For over 3 centuries, European cartographers showed a vast region called Tartaria, or Grand Tartary. These weren't rough sketches or fantasy maps. One look and you'll see the empire dominating huge swaths of Asia. Spanning from the Caspian Sea to the Pacific Ocean, and from Siberia down into Central Asia, some maps even show independent Tartary, Chinese Tartary, and Russian Tartary. This suggests not just one region, but multiple Tartarian territories. But here's the thing. How does a landmass this enormous just disappear? If you still wonder whether the empire did exist, you should see this. Different European nations' maps all show consistent descriptions of Tartarian territories. French maps, Dutch maps, German maps, you name it. They all agree on where Tartaria was located and how large it was. That's not the kind of consistency you'd expect if map makers were just making stories. But in the 1800s, Tartaria began to leave maps, not gradually, no, but suddenly, like someone decided that this empire should no longer exist on paper. The question is, how did this happen? Think about it. At first, there were hundreds of historical maps documenting this empire over 3 centuries, and then nothing. Modern atlases contain no trace of it. Geography textbooks never mention it. It's as if an entire chapter of world history was torn out of the books. But if Tartaria was just a misunderstood term for scattered nomadic tribes, why would anyone bother to erase it so thoroughly? And more importantly, what happened to all those grand cities and territories that the maps clearly showed? The answer might be more shocking than you think. At around the time this empire was vanishing from maps, something extraordinary was happening across America and Europe. Suddenly, grand buildings began appearing everywhere, and we mean everywhere. Massive structures with intricate stonework and architectural details that would challenge modern engineers. Government buildings, train stations, exhibition halls, and even entire city centers. What's more, they were constructed with speed during the late 1800s to early 1900s. The big question is, who gave the engineers such advanced knowledge? Before we answer that, there's a problem. The timeline doesn't add up. In 1906, there was a devastating earthquake in San Francisco, but before anyone could tell what was happening, the city rebuilt itself with jaw-dropping structures, and they did so in a few years. Knowing the effects of such a major disaster, it should take years to recover from the aftermath. But somehow, they found the resources and skilled craftsmen to erect buildings that still marvel today's engineers. How did they achieve such a feat? Could it be that they received external help from Tartarians? If you're still in doubt, let's consider Chicago's World's Columbian Exposition in 1893. In the books, records say that this white city, which spans over 600 acres of elaborate neoclassical buildings, was designed and constructed in just 2 years. 2 years. Can you believe that? These are uniquely crafted buildings that would normally take skilled craftsmen decades to complete. The official explanation? These were temporary structures built with plaster and staff, a mixture of plaster, cement, and fiber. But look at the photographs. Do these buildings look temporary to you? Of course not. These bear the mark of equipped engineers. But this is where it gets really suspicious. Shortly after the exposition ended, the incredible buildings were demolished. Every single one of them. The reason given by the government? The buildings were only meant to be temporary. But think about it. If you invested huge amounts of money into erecting a building, would you just tear it down immediately? It makes no sense. Because of this irrational act, Tartarian theorists shook the world with the big question: what if they were trying to eliminate the last evidence of the Tartarian Empire? If you wonder about the origin of such suspicion, let's take a look at the theorists' proposal. Firstly, these buildings were not constructed for the exhibition fairs like we were made to believe. No. Instead, they already existed. Crazy, right? The thing is, from the 1500s to the 1800s, the Tartarians left a mark. Since they were an advanced civilization, the buildings they erected showed the same excellence. The Tartarian theorists proposed that the government never erected any temporary buildings for the fair. Instead, they renovated the already standing Tartarian structures, then destroyed them afterward. Now let's look at the architectural style itself. These buildings shared remarkably similar design elements no matter where they were built. The same classical columns, the same ornate domes, the same precise stonework. Whether you were looking at a building in Chicago, San Francisco, or St. Petersburg, Russia, they all looked similar. How do you explain that level of consistency across different nations, different construction crews, and different periods, unless they weren't built by different people at all? Still, you won't believe the next card played by Tartarian theorists. They proposed a staggering idea that the architectural evidence goes even deeper than the world's fairs. Perhaps the Tartarian Empire didn't just disappear, It was buried. A walk through any major city built before 1900, and you'll notice something strange. Buildings that appear to be sinking into the ground. First floors that have become basements. Windows that now sit at sidewalk level, looking up at passers-by like the eyes of buried giants. Tartaria theorists call this the evidence of the Great Mud Flood. What is the Great Mud Flood? You wonder. In the 1800s, a catastrophic event visited the land, taking many cities with it. This includes hundreds of Tartarian cities getting lost under layers of mud and debris. According to the Great Mud Flood theory, a massive geological disaster struck the planet, destroying the advanced Tartarian civilization and leaving only the upper floors of their buildings visible. But where is the evidence that this tragedy ever happened? Their response? The evidence is everywhere. In Seattle, entire blocks of buildings show their original ground floors buried beneath modern street level. The famous Seattle Underground isn't just a random tourist attraction. It's proof that the city was once built on a completely different ground level. And guess what? It's not just in Seattle. Enter New York City's subway system, which shows the same pattern. From time to time, construction workers keep uncovering such precise handiwork far beneath the modern city. While the government calls them tourist attractions and makes money off these architectural wonders, nobody bothers to question their origin. And a majority of origins point back to Grand Tartary. Remember the San Francisco earthquake we talked about earlier? It's the second piece of evidence. After the 1906 earthquake, reconstruction plans became the order of the day. But during the reconstruction process, the workers came across really interesting pieces. Instead of finding rubble after the natural disaster, what they found were intact design features, elaborate facades that had been buried for decades. Since this coincides with the period when the Tartarian Empire disappeared, historians wonder, did these architectural pieces come from Grand Tartary? As a counter, mainstream historians offer a simpler explanation for the Great Mud Flood. Their name for it: urban development. They argue that street levels naturally rise over time as new construction builds upon old foundations. Roads get paved and repaved, raising the ground level. Buildings get renovated, with new entrances built at the current street level. But is this really the case? Of course. Tartarian researchers argue this explanation doesn't fully account for their observations, especially since we're not talking about a few inches or even a few feet of gradual change. Entire floors appear to have been buried beneath the modern ground level. What could have caused this, if not the Great Mud Flood? And let's not forget the suspicious timing. Why would this phenomenon appear so consistently across the globe during the same historical period when Tartaria was disappearing from maps? Why would the buried architecture show such remarkable similarity in style and sophistication? The mud flood hypothesis suggests that this wasn't gradual urban development at all. It was the burial of evidence of a civilization that someone desperately wanted hidden beneath the earth. The theory gets more daring. It proposes that the world's fairs of the late 1800s and early 1900s weren't just normal celebrations. According to Tartaria theorists, they were cover-ups. Think about it. How do you hide an entire lost civilization? How do you explain away magnificent buildings that precede the official timeline? Simple. Claim you built them yourself, show them off to the world, and then destroy the evidence. The timeline alone is the biggest red flag. In 1893, the Chicago World's Fair covered 600 acres with over 200 buildings, including huge structures like the Manufactures and Liberal Arts Building. At the time, this was the largest building in the world. The official engineering records say that this entire complex was designed and constructed in just 24 months. But even modern-day engineers find such a swift timeline nearly impossible. Before you agree, let's break down what that would require. The manufacturer's building alone covered 44 acres under a single roof. Its central hall could have fit the US Capitol, the Great Pyramid of Giza, Winchester Cathedral, Madison Square Garden, and St. Paul's Cathedral, all at the same time, with room to spare. Can you imagine that? The building featured intricate ironwork, complex glass exteriors, and structural details that would leave modern construction crews in awe. And we're supposed to believe this was all accomplished in less than 2 years using 1890s technology, and by workers who had never attempted anything remotely similar before. Doesn't it make you wonder too? The 1915 Panama Pacific International Exposition in San Francisco presents an even more impossible timeline. Just 9 years after the devastating 1906 earthquake had reduced much of the city to rubble, San Francisco allegedly constructed an elaborate fairground. This fairground featured the magnificent Palace of Fine Arts and dozens of other engineering wonders. The official story tells us that these structures were built specifically for the exposition using temporary materials. But examine the photographs closely. Does this look like temporary architecture to you? It does not. But this is where they forgot to clear their tracks. Despite the scale and supposed temporary nature of these structures, very few detailed construction photographs exist. We have plenty of images of the finished buildings and their demolition, but remarkably little documentation of the actual construction process. Why is this so? If not because there wasn't any construction to document. If that made you stop in your tracks, this next Tartarian excellence will amaze you. Do you know star forts? They are unique geometric structures with precise angular shapes that appear in many places in the world. Europe, North America, and Asia, you name it. Tartaria researchers point to the mysterious star forts found across the globe. They suggest that the origin is Grand Tartary. Don't take a deep breath yet. While counter-historians classify them as military fortifications designed to withstand cannon fire, the other side says otherwise. One look at their geometric precision, and you'll notice that it doesn't fit the military explanation. The structures of the star forts follow mathematical principles that seem more suited to energy manipulation than defense. The angles, the proportions, the positioning. Everything about star forts screams they were designed according to principles of resonance and electromagnetic field manipulation. They weren't built to keep armies out. They were built to channel and focus energy. To make matters worse, there's the acoustic evidence. Step inside any great cathedral or government building from this era, and you'll immediately notice the incredible acoustic properties. Your voice carries in ways that seem almost supernatural. You'll hear that the sounds resonate and amplify with such amazing accuracy. Tartaria theorists argue that these weren't designed for better church sermons or political speeches. They were built as massive resonance chambers, spaces designed to amplify sound frequencies for technological purposes. Here is where it makes sense. Recent research shows that certain frequencies can influence matter at the molecular level. Sound waves can levitate objects, break down materials, and even alter the properties of water and other substances. What if the Tartarians had mastered this technology centuries before we even understood the principles involved? The implications are staggering. Imagine a civilization that could power entire cities without burning fossil fuels, move massive stone blocks using sound frequencies, and even transmit energy and information across vast distances without any physical infrastructure. Feels like a virtual reality game, right? This explains how the Tartarians could construct such massive buildings so quickly and with such accuracy. It also explains the undeniable consistency of building styles across different continents. And it might explain why this civilization had to be erased from history. Because if free energy technology existed, if it was really possible to power the world without oil, coal, or nuclear fuel, that knowledge would threaten the entire foundation of the modern economic system. And no government would have liked that idea. And if the Tartarians possessed such advanced technology, what happened to it? And why don't we see any evidence of these energy systems in operation today? The answer might be more disturbing than the theory itself. But before we go into that, here's where the Tartarian mystery takes its most incredible turn. If this advanced civilization existed and built these massive structures using free energy technology, there's a burning question we need to ask. What did the Tartarians themselves look like? The answer is both simple and shocking. They were giants. Walk through any grand building constructed during the Tartarian era, and you'll immediately notice something odd about the proportions. Doorways that tower 12, 15, and even 20 feet high. Staircases with steps so large that normal-sized people have to stretch to climb them comfortably. Ceilings that are 3 times higher than what we see today. Who would use such towering designs if not giants? Mainstream historians try to explain this as grandeur for grandeur's sake. This is the idea that architects simply wanted to create impressive spaces that would awe visitors. But Tartaria theorists propose a different explanation. These buildings weren't designed to impress normal-sized humans. They were designed for inhabitants who were significantly taller. Consider the furniture depicted in photographs from the late 1800s. Chairs with seats positioned unusually high off the ground. Tables that seem oversized even for their grand surroundings. Beds that appear massive even by the standards of luxury accommodations. There is more evidence pointing to a gigantic race. The historical accounts speak for themselves. During the 1800s and early 1900s, newspapers across America regularly reported discoveries of giant skeletons. Not just 1 or 2 isolated incidents, but dozens of documented findings. The Smithsonian Institution's records from this period mention numerous acquisitions of unusually large human remains, found during construction projects, mining operations, and archaeological projects. Skeletons measuring 7, 8, and even 9 feet in height, with bone structure that suggested they belonged to a distinct race of humans. But here's where it gets suspicious. If you try to find any of these giant skeletons in museum collections today, you would be wasting your time. They've all vanished. According to Tartaria theorists, the Smithsonian and other institutions systematically removed these remains from public view, either destroying them or storing them in private collections where researchers can't access them. The big question is, why? We lack the answer too. The thing is, the cover-up theory extends beyond just hiding bones. Some researchers claim that historical photographs from the late 1800s were deliberately edited to make people appear normal-sized to match the buildings around them. It gets even more interesting. Cultural memory springs up piece of evidence. Nearly every ancient civilization has legends of giants, beings who were larger and more powerful than ordinary humans. Greek mythology speaks of titans. The Bible mentions Nephilim. Norse legends describe enormous warriors. Native American tribes across the continent have stories of giant races that once inhabited their lands. What if these weren't just myths and legends? What if they were cultural memories of actual encounters with a race of giant humans, the Tartarians themselves? This would explain the large scale of Tartarian architecture. It would explain why these buildings seem designed for inhabitants much larger than ourselves. And it would provide yet another reason why evidence of this civilization had to be systematically erased from history. Acknowledging the existence of a race of giants would fundamentally challenge our understanding of human evolution and development. It would raise uncomfortable questions about what happened to these beings and why modern humans inherited their world. Everything you know about how you came to be would suddenly look false. But soon enough, another query rose to the surface. If the Tartarians were truly giants with advanced technology, how did they disappear so completely? And who had the power to erase all evidence of their existence from the historical record? The answer leads us to the darkest aspect of the Tartarian conspiracy: their disappearance. What we're talking about isn't just the disappearance of one civilization. According to Tartaria theorists, we're looking at evidence of the most massive historical cover-up in human history. Most likely a deliberate, coordinated effort to rewrite our entire understanding of the past. They call it the Great Reset. This is not the recent economic theory, but a much older and more sinister process of erasing inconvenient truths from the historical record. Consider the timing of major catastrophic events in the 1800s and early 1900s. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871, the San Francisco earthquake of 1906, World War I from 1914 to 1918, the Spanish flu pandemic, World War II. Mainstream historians see these as unrelated tragedies, natural disasters, conflicts, and diseases that shape the modern world. But Tartaria theorists propose something far more disturbing. These weren't random events. They were coordinated attacks designed to destroy evidence of the Tartarian civilization. Wait, what? Yes. They suggest that the Great Chicago Fire is particularly suspicious. Official records claim it started when Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicked over a lantern in her barn. But examine the destruction pattern, and you'll notice something odd. The fire specifically targeted the most elaborate and architecturally significant buildings in the city, while leaving simpler structures largely untouched. If this is true, then the cover-up may be more extensive than even Tartaria theorists realize. Tartaria might not be the only advanced civilization that's been erased from our history. However, the most compelling evidence comes from historical photography. Examine photographs of major cities taken in the late 1800s, and you'll notice something deeply unsettling. The streets are empty. We're not talking about light foot traffic or quiet neighborhoods. Look at the major metropolitan areas, New York, London, Paris, Berlin, that appear virtually abandoned. Wide boulevards stretch for blocks without a single person visible. Grand public squares sit completely vacant. Entire city centers look like elaborate movie sets waiting for actors to arrive. This is suspicious. The conventional explanation for this involves photographic technology. Early cameras required long exposure times, and moving people simply didn't register in the final image. But this explanation starts to break down when you consider the scale of what we're seeing. These aren't just streets with fewer people than expected. These are photographs of massive urban centers that appear to have been completely abandoned. Where are the carriages? Where are the street vendors? Where are the basic signs of urban life that you'd expect in any functioning city? The empty streets in historical photographs might indeed be explained by long exposure times, combined with the fact that 19th century urban centers were genuinely less crowded than modern cities. But acknowledging these conventional explanations doesn't mean we should dismiss every aspect of the Tartarian mystery. So again we ask, what happened to Grand Tartary? You tell us what you think in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. If this story intrigued you, wait until you hear about Mu, the mother civilization said to be even older than Tartaria. Tap the video on screen and dive deeper. Keep your minds open. And until we meet again,